All right, so I'm going to take a stab at this because I got a form of this question a lot after the game. If you're 1-1, and that's where everybody thought that you would be after 2 games, but it's because you beat Oklahoma and lost to Arkansas State. How exactly does that happen? How is that possible? How can you explain that? And even as somebody here who was, hiding under the desk in fear of Oklahoma the entire week last week, in retrospect, I think it's actually quite explainable. And I think a lot of this goes back to a message that I did try to reinforce after the Arkansas State loss, which is I'm not going to panic and melt down about this the way that a lot of people are. Because take K-State's defense, for instance, here. Who were by far the 2 best players that K-State had defensively on Saturday? Khalid Duke, Jerron McPherson.
Correct.
Khalid Duke didn't play at all in the first game. Jerron McPherson played like 2 series, was injured, 1 series, was injured, went out, not to return.
Yeah.
Ross Elder was not available. He played and he looked, no offense to Ryan Hennington, but worlds better than Ryan Hennington.
He was unavailable for
at safety.
Arkansas State.
He did not play in week 1.
Yeah.
Right? So I know it's Arkansas State, and you want to just say, well, it's inexcusable. You shouldn't lose that game. But, they had 30-plus players out, and there are 3 of them right there that were really good, including your 2 best players defensively, did not play in that first game against Arkansas State, okay? Then let's take into account what we've seen across the board in college football this year, which is teams that have played a game have a massive advantage over teams that have not played a game. And that's been true.
That's pretty explainable, too, to be honest.
Right. Yeah. Almost without fault, that's been true, which it would make sense in a normal year, but it makes sense times 10 in a year where there's been a pandemic. And, nobody wants to hear that and nobody wants to hear excuses, but, how different is your life right now in 2020 as opposed to what it was in 2019? Mm-hmm. That translates to the football field, man. They have not had as much time to work together on all of these fronts. And in conjunction with that, it was the first game for all of these offensive linemen who they're trying to get something figured out there and some cohesiveness figured out there. And then on the other side, with Oklahoma, you say, okay, John, I get it. I get how K-State would be much improved, but what about Oklahoma? Well, Oklahoma's starters against Missouri State basically played a half. They had to play a half of football, and that was it, against a completely undermanned FCS team. So Spencer Rattler, the most important position, he's a quarterback that is, yes, wildly talented, but again, played basically 2 quarters against Missouri State with no resistance at all. And now all of a sudden he's going out there for the first time having to be met with some actual resistance, with K-State now having a fuller complement of their frontline players defensively. Okay? And then on top of all of that, yes, it's at Oklahoma, but what do they have, 25% capacity?
Correct.
So it's not nearly the home field advantage that it typically would be. So
we're 22-7 there.
And by the way, your quarterback is a 5th-year senior.
Yes.
When their quarterback is a freshman. And say what you will about him, and I've got a lot to say about Skylar Thompson today, but say what you will about him, he definitely brings leadership and grit, which those are 2 things that Spencer Rattler does not have right now. So that equation actually, to me, makes it reasonably explainable how that happens, and that it's not some... I get it's a huge upset and it's really fun and exciting, and I'm not trying to take any of the shine off of that, but I think it actually is something we should have seen coming much more than we did, and there are a lot of logical explanations here that start with nobody should have melted down as much as they did after week 1.
One thing I would add to your equation here that I think is just blatantly obvious is the way, and I'm talking just the difference in Saturday as opposed to just the Arkansas State game versus the Oklahoma game. If you look at it fairly at how the defense in the second half played with an edge and with an attitude and faster, that was the defense we were expecting opening day. Didn't happen. Again, I go back to what you said about, Khalid is part of that, Jerron is part of that, but everybody else is involved too. I think all of those young guys would tell you right now, we just weren't good enough. We just weren't. And once they kind of got rolling there in the second half, you could see the confidence just oozing, couldn't you?
Yeah,
I felt like I could.
Yeah. Well,
they were playing with an edge in that second half. You could see it building.
to that end, no one wants excuses. Hey, your first game out of a pandemic, whatever, you should be ready to roll. Like, okay, man. What about Justin Hughes? Like, Justin Hughes went like 500 days. Yeah, 600 days without playing a football game. And he came out, and it was his first game in 600 days, coming off a major knee surgery where he had like 3, it was like ACL, MCL, and meniscus all on his knee, just wrecked his knee, and it's his first game back out there against Arkansas State. Would stand to reason that there are some kinks to get worked out, right? And what did he do on Saturday against Oklahoma? He had 10 tackles. He was flying all over the place. That's the kind of thing that can happen between game 1 and game 2. And people don't want to hear it and think that it really takes that, but it does. And I think we saw that on Saturday.
I think over the course of a season, too, you heard how many times over the years did you hear Bill Snyder say, as an example, every year is different? I think the perfect example of that right at the moment is Jerron McPherson, who played really well last year. Where? At nickel.
Nickel.
Okay. Where he started the first game this year was different than nickel, and he got popped early and went out. Saturday, he was in another position. So he's played both safety positions in nickel in the last basically 2 years. I don't know if anybody understands how difficult that could be, including us, right? And the kid was, from my perspective, I don't think he's ever played any better than he did Saturday in almost every way. So there is growth and learning, and they had too many penalties against Saturday. There's no doubt about that. Coach Kleiman would be the first to line up and tell you that. But I do think you saw enough growth in that particular game with the offensive line to say, okay, maybe they got a shot to be all right. Maybe they won't be the Achilles heel of this team like we were talking about after week 1. So there are lots and lots and lots of factors here.
Well, let's take it a level up from the players to the coaches. And I know that Courtney Messingham is a lightning rod for criticism a lot of times as the offensive coordinator. I mean, historically, here at K-State, it's not a seat that you want to be in.
You know what that is? That's the coaching equivalent of the quarterback.
Yeah, right, exactly.
It's just what it is.
Well, Courtney Messingham, again, I go back to this Matt Wells clip, and here, I can play it for you right now. Let's see. Where's, do I not? All right, I don't have it right now. Matt Wells was talking about how good K-State's skill position players were. And the first thing he talks about is those 2 backs. Well, those guys are both freshmen. And so even for Courtney Messingham, I'm sure they liked the potential that those guys had when they watched them in practice. Mm-hmm. But you still have to figure out what they can do when they get out on an actual field and see if they can put that out there. I mean, they seemed excited about Deuce Vaughn, but nobody was saying this guy's going to be like helmet sticker, getting all this national attention after 2 weeks. You have to figure that out. And I think it's taken some time for him to figure out, okay, our best offense right now is find some kind of mismatch to get Deuce Vaughn the ball. So I think that's another thing from week 1 to week 2. And even over the course of half 1 to half 2 in that game, it was a realization, a feeling out process of, all right, we need to get these freshmen that we have that are so much more explosive than most of the skill talent we inherited. We need to figure out ways to get them the ball. So I think there's even an evolution there with the coaches that can explain some of this.
I think you could throw Connor Riley into that mix too. I mean, we saw, and I'm not picking on anyone, but we saw some play that he wasn't very happy with at left tackle early in the game, and the next thing you know, it's Christian Duffy in there for Katori Leviston as an example. And I think you look at the entirety of the game and see the improvement as they went and compare that to week 1, and I think you've got to look at that. That was pretty decent growth. Not perfect, but better, and that's what you want.